My name is Setareh, Artistic Director, and we are very happy to see you, both here in the chapel and online, because we're also live streaming the lecture and recording it for later publication on YouTube. And we are here in the middle of the group exhibition Missing Homes. And tonight we are holding an art history school, which is a thematic, interactive, art historical, art actual, or art critical lecture, departing from the projects at Hotel Maria Kapel. But tonight we hold an art actuality school, or art actuality referencing association, which I will further introduce in a little bit. Very warm welcome to guest speaker, or I should say maybe host speaker, Alina Lupu. And I say host speaker because Alina is currently artist in residence here at Hotel Maria Kapel. Living and spending time at Hotel Maria Kapel for the month of July, together with her mother, Vali Lupu. Good to see you here, Vali, as well. And another warm welcome to Danai Giannoglou, curator of Missing Homes. First, I will briefly introduce the group exhibition Missing Homes. Then Alina Lupu, or your lecture Soft Power, Hard Power, Walks, Queering, Conspiracies, Institutional Critique, and Something to Hold On to, which will last about 40 minutes, after which we planned an exchange between Danai and Alina, which is open to any questions or reactions from you, the public, but also on Instagram Live. If you have a question, you can type it and then we can forward that to the people here. And then you're welcome to stay for a drink outside or in the cafe, and perhaps watch the exhibition if you haven't seen it yet. So we are currently in the middle of our year program, or further than the middle right now, which is called On Shelter, which invites artists and cultural practitioners to think through where and how we can shelter and be sheltered. What do we need sheltering from in these times? What would our new shelters look like? What are the politics of sheltering, especially in a politically divided world? Can we imagine shelters that are porous, spiritually and politically, that are in relation and exchange with different worlds? And how could these worlds be imagined or radically imagined? During this year of On Shelter, we, the artists in residence, and with that our visitors, unpack notions of home and safety, motherhood and reproductive labor, climate catastrophe and transness and sleep. Having said all that, here I'd like to shout out to Miriam Wistreich. I'm not sure if you're watching, but Miriam is the former artistic director of Hotel Maria Kapel and actually the architect of the program On Shelter. And before introducing Missing Homes and Alina's reflection on it, I'd like to emphasize again this public moment of gathering, and not only since we will be speaking of notions such as shelter and safety, but as people and as an open house, to express that in this space that we share and where we meet, we do not accept racism, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homo and transphobia. Missing Homes is a group exhibition which is on until the 5th of September, and it's part of our everlasting effort to grasp, feel, understand, negotiate, and exist within the physical and metaphorical structures that house us. Curator Danai Giannoglou invites Arie de Fijter, Paky Vlassopoulou, Naqvi, Shreya de Souza and Mylou Oord as organizers of the Queer Choir Amsterdam, and SMET, Setareh, Noorani and Plezier, to think along and make themselves at home, even if only temporarily, inside Hotel Maria Kapel. Alina has accepted the task of reflecting on missing homes by freely associating and making links to present-day events, wondering where can we currently find signals of resistance concerning the notion of shelter and institutional frameworks, and how these signals of resistance manifest. The works in the exhibition Missing Homes will play the role of starting points, or anchors, or as actors, which will guide the conversation. So, Alina, the word is yours.
So I entitled tonight's talk, lecture, Free Association, Soft Power, Hard Power, Walks, Queering, Conspiracies, Institutional Critique, and Something to Hold On To. I think because I wanted an anchor in the show myself, and it was many things to freely associate on, and well, I did my very best. So first, a little bit about me before we begin. So I'm Romanian, and I've been living in the Netherlands since 2012. I'm an artist and a writer, and since my arrival in the Netherlands, I've spent limited amount of time with my family on trips to my home country, or through trips my family took to visit me. These trips always amounted to no more than 1 or 2 weeks at a time. So in 2020, I approached the then director of Hotel Maria Kapel, Miriam, as Tirza introduced her, through their open call to propose inviting my mother to stay in residence with me. I wanted a chance to continue a dialogue that began when I was born. I wanted us to learn from each other new ways of being, but also to reflect on the old ones that made us who we are as individuals and in relation. And boy, did I get that. At the beginning of July this year, we arrived at HMK. I'm right now around 22 days in my residency in Hoorn, but that's a bit misleading. 3 days into arriving in Hoorn, I woke up early in the morning. I packed my belongings and my mother and headed back home to Amsterdam, where I usually live. I came back, but left again, 5 days in for another week. 17 days in, I returned to Hoorn, but I continued to oscillate because my actual home wasn't too far away. So I asked myself multiple times where my shelter is located, since shelter is the overarching theme of the year at HMK. And I guess in my case, shelter is where my partner is at the moment. Well, my partner is here tonight, but anyway, usually he's 1 hour away by train and a bus and a bit of walking. And shelter is also my mother, but I've grown to build my own home in the meantime, away from her, a home which I was also curious to show her. I've also inevitably asked myself what a residency is throughout the last few weeks, and how one can take ownership of an institution, and whether we still need group shows in art institutions, or what can come after we're done our questioning, and what shape will the outcome of my own residency with my mom at HMK take. I have no answer for that yet. I wondered also what would happen if artists started refusing the demands of what a regular art practice can be, and what display times can be, and what support structures are. What would be a radical reimagining of artistic practice once we've experienced deep and transformative groundlessness? After all, we had a tough year, a year and a half, on a global level. But so far, I do not have answers. What I do have is the commitment to reflect on the show currently on view at HMK, entitled Missing Homes. One more full disclosure. I speak very fast, but that's not it. If anyone wants to ease me down, you can do that. But the other full disclosure, I have no proper background to give an art history lesson. After all, I studied at the Rietveld Academy. What I do have is my position as an artist and my vibrant curiosity for the field as a whole. In that sense, I'm always learning. So when I was asked to reflect on the currently ongoing exhibition curated by Danai, I decided to take that as a challenge to better dive into my own associations with Danai's outcome. And before doing the diving, I'd like to say a bit about my method. As I've already mentioned, I'm no art historian. What I managed to be throughout the last 9 years of living in the Netherlands is curious about its squatting history and more or less in tune with its current exhibition history. And since last year, I'm also very much aware of art institutional upheavals, of art institutional changes. But again, I am no expert, since the speed at which change is happening has accelerated. I try to keep up, but I admit at times I lag behind. So it's from these angles that I will proceed to link the works in the show to what happened outside of the doors of Hotel Maria Kapel, which also might have influenced the works, or which can put the works in a new light. I'll take the work as actors. We have the work of SMET, Setareh, Noorani, and Plezier in the entry hall. And now, let's see what fails next. Kidding. This is the work. Come on, my friend. Yes. The work of the Queer Choir, Shreya de Souza, Mylou Oord, and Naqvi as organizers and participants alongside others. The work is downstairs, playing in the cinema. We also have the work of Naqvi hanging from the ceiling, and the work of Arie at the back, which is actually at the front for you right now, though Arie's work is also the silent guided walks he organized in Hoorn, and the work of Paky to the sides. Oh, pardon me, damn it. SMET dove into Dutch squatting history, there we go, and local Hoorn history as well. For those unfamiliar with what squatting is, this is one illustration. And I also noticed that some of my international friends didn't really have a grasp of the concept. So squatting is actually more like this. It's the taking over of a building that is not inhabited or in use. And the building can be at home, but it can also be a school. For example, the building next to Hotel Maria Kapel, the Bousman building, is a case in point. Or a former factory. For example, my current temporary studio is in the Teterode building in Amsterdam, which is a former type foundry. It can also be a storage facility. I'm currently writing about the former storage space called the Calendar Pandem in Amsterdam, which is a separate assignment that I'm busy with. Now, squatting is done worldwide, and if you dive into the topic further, you will find out that hundreds of millions of homes are currently being squatted. But I'll stick to the Netherlands. Historically, squatting started in the Netherlands in the 1960s. The dynamic of squatting, people in need of taking over spaces unused or marked for renovation or demolition, speaks about a housing shortage in the cities where it happens. But it also speaks about property speculation. In some cases, now and in the 60s, buildings were declared uninhabitable way before it was necessary. They're marked for demolition, and the people that live in them, usually lower income, are taken out, displaced, to make way for new property development. What squatters usually do in such cases is pull an alarm trigger to signal property speculation. The overall market at the moment is quite, well, going through the roof. To illustrate that, these are posters that were made by Yuri Veerman recently for Amsterdam, for Utrecht, for Rotterdam, and for The Hague. And what you see is a bit of a taking over of the identity of the squatting movement and turning that into an upward spike of the prices of housing in all these cities over the past, I think, 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. And I'll give you a few more examples of squatting, both historical and actual. There's the redevelopment of the Newmarkt neighborhood in Amsterdam, which was aimed at putting a wide highway through the heart of the city of Amsterdam and at developing the East Metro line while evicting locals. And this marked the beginning of the squatting actions in 1968 and the Newmarkt riots in 1975. So this was like in the very heart of the city, and it's also really like reshaped the way in which the center of Amsterdam looked. For a while it was a bit of a battlefield. It also made pretty nice graphics and overall visuals. So the riots at the time saved the old bit of Newmarkt and are even memorialized in the Newmarkt metro station. So there is a sort of pride in this squatting history that Amsterdam had. Now, the before mentioned building of Teterode, which is a former typewriter foundry, was squatted in the 80s by a group of artists who self-organized and eventually took hold of the building and are still currently living in it and calling it their homes and studios. This is how it looks like at the moment. And then you also have the case of the neighborhood of Twee Bosbuurt in Rotterdam, which has recently been declared unfit for living and demolished. This is present day. Families have been violently evicted, unfortunately, given that we are now far from the golden days of squatting. The squatting action did not win, but Recht op de Staat, a local organization in Rotterdam, started talking about gentrification, started protesting against demolition, and mobilized the neighbors in fighting against it. Recht op de Staat carried out several protests and also reached out to the United Nations to confirm that the demolition of the houses in Twee Bosbuurt is a violation of human rights. Various individual houses in Amsterdam are also currently on and off being squatted by an organization called the Anarcha Feminist Group. The most prominent house of this type was in the center on the Spouwstraat during the 8th of March of this year. It has since been evicted, and to get to that, I'll have to convince my computer to function. Oh, shit. There we go. So this is what was happening on the 8th of March. It also comes with, excuse the sound. They took over the building, but it was only temporary, but they also did it to make a statement. So the full statement is on the Forum for Anarchisme Instagram page. It looks quite impressive, but that's not the only reason why they did it. The building I'm currently being hosted in at Hotel Maria Kapel, which is the neighboring building. The Bouwsman building is also formerly a squatted school, now artist studios. It is called the Bouwsman building after the municipality representatives who gave the key to the place to the squatters ended up owning it. The Hotel Maria Kapel itself actually wasn't really squatted from what I understood. I could be corrected, but given to the artist by the municipality. So in a way it was squatted with the help of the municipality. Squatting is generally, at least for a brief moment, while someone breaks in, an illegal affair. But what happened throughout time is that the municipality took a less proactive approach to evict squatters. Some even passed on the building, like Bouwsman. In some cases, squatters had a hand in negotiations. They might be offered alternative buildings to live in, somewhere further from the city center, for example, and then they could take them or not. Gradually, though, since the end of the 1980s, what happened is that eviction notices got shorter. For example, the Anarcha Feminist Group have been evicted on the same day in some cases, and they are getting more violent, like in Twee Bosbuurt. Though violence was always part of evicting squatters. And as an example, this is the eviction of the Kalender Pandem in Amsterdam. What is again impressive about this is it started at 5 in the morning, lasted until 10, and it turned very violent. The whole street was turned upside down to get this done, and it's more or less central to Amsterdam. It's not really like, and it happened in 2000, so it's still quite recent history. I was reading through the publications from SMET, and there is a mention of the fact that the law against squatting changed in 2010. So the squatting ban was criminalized and derailed. And then in 2021, the times that squatters are evicted decreased to 72 hours since they started squatting. So this didn't used to be the case. For example, the people in Kalender Pandem stayed there for 4 years in the end. Some people took over their buildings and so on. It's happening less and less. There's also construction that was made up to work against squatting, which is called anti-squat. And anti-squat functions through temporary contracts with eviction times of 1 to 3 months, 3 months being quite luxurious, and with no guarantee of a place once one gets evicted. The contracts give few rights to the tenants, and they are in buildings which are not renovated, sometimes with no running water or heating. They're also aimed to be contracts for individuals and not families, leading to situations in which if one has a kid while in anti-squat, they can get evicted. The companies that offer them, Ad Hoc, VPS, but also Aimere, Rockdale, Eichhard, and so on, are former social housing companies that have gradually renovated and sold off their stock. The rent in anti-squat is low, but in fact there shouldn't be any rent at all, since what you're basically becoming if you take on an anti-squat contract, and I should know, I had one, is an unpaid guard for a space that will eventually be redeveloped for someone that earns much more than you do. So who takes this sort of contract? Well, given our tendency, and by our tendency I mean artists, to need housing and not have a lot of income, but also to need exhibition space for cheap, and to need to not get in trouble with the law, there are a lot of artists that currently live in anti-squat in large Dutch cities. An illustration of this dynamic can be seen in the case of the anarcha-feminist group and those that took their place. The building that the anarcha-feminist group squatted at Spouwstraat 59 on March 8th was evicted violently by the police a few weeks in. It was then given over to the VPS property speculators and offered as an anti-squat contract to two artists that organize exhibitions as a nomadic gallery. The nomadic space displays young, freshly graduated artists. It is funded by the Amsterdam Fonds for the Kunst, and it has a semi-professional social media presence, and in one elegant move, it managed to erase the history of the squatting action. So the same building became an exhibition space later in spring. But it's also quite interesting because people actually know what happened, but it moves on because, you need an exhibition space. If in the 1960s and 1980s artists were the squatters, in the 2020s artists are the complicit tools of property speculators. But they don't have to be. At the moment, after public outcry, the nomadic gallery owners have been called out by the squatters and other Amsterdammers that follow the squatting action. And the hope is that a bridge of dialogue will be built between the squatters and the artists. I'll move on to protest. And I'll hang on to the Sarah Naqvi manifesto, which, if one were to take a quick dive into the history of art, they'll link it to the movement called institutional critique. We have the text, we have a banner, we have demands. We have, as far as I can read, an attempt to reimagine the future of art institutions. A friend told me the other day that it's maybe worth starting with art institutions if we are to reimagine things, because art institutions are said to be at the vanguard. This is, of course, a debatable statement. What I've been briefly told in the introduction to the show is that Sarah is at the moment in residency at the Atelier in Amsterdam, and that she started to think of the residency, given its duration, as some sort of a home, or a precondition of a home. While the Atelier is mostly a workspace, those that are accepted to work in it also in some cases change cities or countries, they change homes. What Sarah did then when she entered her new home is she started questioning its whiteness. In fact, the name of the piece, or rather its main visible title, I might be wrong about the name, but for sure its main visible title, is "What forms will the institution take outside the white institution?" With the title and the references scattered throughout the banner, I'm made to think of institutional fluidity. It's not just the jacuzzi park theory that's listed at top. We have a structure that destabilizes the current hegemony, static structures that mimic a more normalized contemporary form of structural racism, the white institution, 100 years and older, which has managed to stand still. So I ended up linking this physical manifesto to another institutional challenge, to the work of Diana Al-Halabi, former student, fresh graduate of the Piet Zwart Institute in Rotterdam. And yes. Diana's work, also the work of a whole collective of other classmates and teachers that supported her, consisted of a solidarity banner, which was made and tied to the staircase of the Piet Zwart Institute in mid-May of this year. The banner was made as a direct reaction to what was, and still actually is, happening in Palestine at the moment. And the banner proclaimed, "Stop the ethnic cleansing, save Sheikh Jarrah, free Palestine." The banner led to an initial reaction from the institution. By May 17th, the banner was taken down. The institution called the students over for a conversation and released a statement to justify the school's stance: political neutrality. The statement is the following, part of it. A number of students have expressed their concern by displaying a banner on one of our buildings. We have removed this banner because we, as a University of Applied Sciences, do not get involved in geopolitical situations, and our buildings should not be used to this end. We are willing to engage in dialogue, to facilitate the dialogue between groups of students and staff with different allegiances, but our long-held principle has been that we do not take political stands, whether on national or international issues. In the meantime, that online statement has been rightfully plundered. More than 300 comments criticizing it gathered on the social media post on an otherwise uneventful social media account that numbers 2 or 3 comments on a good day. With the assistance of social media archaeology, the students have pointed out the hypocrisy of stating neutrality in regards to the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, while preaching freedom of speech in the cases like Charlie Hebdo, or in making empty statements in the form of a black square in support of Black Lives Matter, or establishing, of all things, an office for inclusivity. It was interesting to see that many chimed in on the topic, and here I'll quote another friend, Silvio LaRusso, who beautifully framed these dynamics, which are between an institutional stance on the one hand and the student and staff stance on the other. One should take the official statement seriously. No authentic political stance can be expected from the institution. Politics will mainly remain at the pedagogical level, that is both the informal level of conversations and discussions, and the formal one of syllabi and programs. Students and teachers might be surprised by the school's authoritarian decision, but the school shouldn't be surprised by their reaction. A double bind is in place. In several academies, the educational level prizes the political to the extent that nothing can escape it, while the managerial level is blind to it, or even actively against it when it goes beyond content, that is, when it is truly political. Some institutions have followed suit in making public statements in support of the people of Palestine. Among them, HKU MFA, DAI, Casco, Working for the Commons, the Rijksacademie, Jan van Eyck, and the Atelier, where Sarah is a resident. Following up on an initial statement published and disseminated by colleagues from the Graduate Gender Program and Netherlands Research School of Gender Studies at Utrecht University. This back and forth at PZI, this illustration of politics in art institutions, and of so-called neutrality, continues for weeks. In a genuine twist, since the pro-Palestine banner kept being taken down every day after it was put up by students, Diana decided to use it as a prop in a performative action. She stopped tying it to the fire escape of PZI and started holding it, always with one other person. For 2 weeks, the same banner was held 8 hours per day above the staircase until graduation. Then something surprising happened. On the 1st of July, the flag performance also got its completion. It's unreadable, but this was the official apology of the Hogeschool Rotterdam, extended by the institution to Diana and all of the flag holders. The apology was listed at the entry into the exhibition of the Piet Zwart Institute. One quote from the apology reads as such: "While trying to preserve our white innocence, as Gloria Wecker puts it, we fail to embody the token we claim to represent. We claim to be inclusive, while we were in reality only tolerant. And to be tolerant is to endure. However, endurance was never a synonym for inclusivity. The apology felt a bit surreal, but it also felt necessary, and it created a precedent. I look to Sarah's banner and I wonder if what's being advocated in not so many words is the dismantling of the institution as a whole or just its reimagining. I've heard it accurately pointed out that in this day and age, when institutions are being challenged, we do risk forgetting that what they have as certain respectable aspects, for example, one is expertise, but maybe more importantly, accountability. One could ask, and rightfully so, would a hyperfluid institution hold itself accountable? And how would accountability look like for it? Or would a hyperfluid institution assume it cannot cause any harm? I've held for an hour the banner that Diana hoisted up on the PZI staircase while she was taking a break. I've laid the grease of my hands on the bits of fabric and saw it float in the wind beneath me. I've shared snacks with the other banner holders and conversations. I've waited for that apology as well. Looking at Sarah's banner, I can't help but think what triggered her reflections on the white institution. I mean, partially I'm aware of where they come from, but I also can't help but wonder how her banner operates as displayed within a white institution. And what function does the half-raised and difficult-to-read hanging serve? Is there a desire to dismantle Hotel Maria Kapel as an institution? Is there a demand raised to the organizers of it? Is there a desire to dismantle the Atelier as an institution? Is there a demand raised to the organizers of it? I guess what I'm asking is, where's the friction? Is there any? Does there need to be some? I wonder if the protest, like the cloth, has turned soft. I wonder if this was intentional. It's a similar set of questions that I stumbled across when thinking about the piece from the Queer Choir Amsterdam, which is visible in the cinema of HMK. I wonder if, in time, and for some, the power struggle ended up moving from the streets and into the self, into the body. If we became multitudes and are starting to show solidarity based on that alone, I wonder how our solidarity manifests then with those causes that are not about us. These are understandably all open questions, and questions that I also personally grapple with each day. After so much staring at works, I cleared my head by joining the walk that Arie de Fijter took us on during the opening. It was a silent walk. We passed by the 7 churches in Hoorn, finding next to each small references, and I couldn't help but think of the prints he's showing in Missing Homes, which show the church buildings from top down and from the bottom up. A bird's eye view, a worm's perspective, a queer perspective. I had to think back of a written piece by Hito Steyr from 2011, an unstable time, at least for the arts in the Netherlands, a time of budget cuts and of cultural reorientation, and to the shifting times we currently find ourselves in. The piece from Hito is called In Freefall, a thought experiment on vertical perspective. Oh. Come on, you can do it. And she goes on to state, many contemporary philosophers have pointed out that the present moment is distinguished by a prevailing condition of groundlessness. We cannot assume any stable ground on which to base metaphysical claims or foundational political myths. At best, we are faced with temporary, contingent, and partial attempts at grounding. But if there is no stable ground available for our social lives and philosophical aspirations, the consequence must be a permanent, or at least intermittent, state of freefall for subjects and objects alike. But why don't we notice? I think we might have not noticed groundlessness in 2011, but now it's become too obvious to ignore. And we very much notice our position in Arie's piece and also in Paky's pieces. Back to Hito though. Paradoxically, while you are falling, you will probably feel as if you are floating, or not even moving at all. because falling is relational. If there is nothing to fall towards, you may not even be aware that you're falling. If there is no ground, gravity might be low and you'll feel weightless. Objects will stay suspended if you let go of them. Whole societies around you may be falling just as you are. And it may actually feel like perfect stasis, as if history and time have ended and can't even remember that time ever moved forward. Moving countries can trigger groundlessness. It did for me. It did for Sarah, it did for Diana. It seems to have also done the same for Paky. Now, imagine you come to a new country and you do the natural thing of looking for an apartment, and the first thing you notice, as almost a universal of rental conditions, is the fact that you can bring your own floor, and the resident before you had to take theirs with them. Paky, through her work, offers some form of a solution. She dislodges a floor, but allows us to get a grip. In fact, get multiple grips on that floor she dislodges. Because once we do notice that we're falling, we might end up frantically looking for a way to grab a hold of something solid. We might put handles on everything, really, and grab them like there's no tomorrow. We might grab so hard, though, once we realize there's no solid ground, that we take the floor with us. I don't know if that is the answer, but it might take another generation until we figure out what the answer is. And until then, it doesn't want to work. Anyone see my cursor? Should I dance? I'm not figuring out if I should dance or not. Anyway, thank you for your patience. I think we're supposed to be talking? Yes. Cool. I will physically share it with you. Yes, I was about to say, yeah. Okay, so the question from Danai was if these free associations come from, well, are also present in my practice, or if they come from a personal, like, interest or fascination, or. About squatting. Yeah. Yeah, I think the reason why I spoke extensively about squatting is because I'm currently busy with writing another piece about squatting, but also because at a certain point in time, and I think this is kind of a universal of living in Amsterdam, you end up in housing issues, and then I ended up in living in anti-squat and also trying to understand what that construction means, because it predated me coming to Amsterdam. So then I was like, okay, what is it? And you try to understand your rights as a tenant and try to kind of like protect your rights as a tenant. And as you try to untangle that, you kind of dive deeper into the topic and you end up also making work about it. I did make a collaborative work about housing in Amsterdam at a certain point with a friend. We made a survey trying to figure out how students in the Rietveld and Sandburg live. So that was 2019, 2020. And then we figured out, some of them squat, some of them anti-squat, some of them are sleeping on couches because there's no housing in Amsterdam. Yeah, it's a continuous interest, I would say.
I have a second question.
Shoot.
Which might be a little bit out of what's, or not, but anyway, a lot of the references you brought to us were within the framework of Instagram. And I was wondering, what's the your relationship, I don't know, I found it interesting and I was curious to know whether the social media prism is something that influence your references, what you brought to us, how you saw some of the things in this experience, because we were also speaking about social media a while ago, before the presentation.
Yeah, so you're asking, I'm going to repeat the question, if, because I presented many references that were visible on social media, if that has an influence on the way in which I gather my references, or in general?
In general, yes.
Well, I think in the case, for example, I think all these events have been quite accelerated over the past months, and mostly for visual artists, social media has been a sort of way of communicating these things in real time. Of course, the experience of squatting and the experience of holding a banner or protesting against an institution is completely different in real life than it is on social media. At the same time, I try to do both. Like, I try to visit these buildings, the squatters' buildings, and I try to keep an eye on what's happening in real life as well, in order to understand the complexity of what's happening. Like, sometimes holding a banner is fucking boring, but it's part of it, it's resistance. Or squatting a building might be a really lonely affair, or a confusing sort of thing, which happens on multiple platforms at the same time. So I try to understand it from multiple angles, but social media is part of it. And I think they also want to publicize these actions in order to show that they're a vibrant community, and I can respect that, and I keep an eye on it that way. Yeah. You're welcome.
Are there any questions for either Alina?
It's also about squatting. You mentioned the calendar bubble.
Yeah.
So is that going to be a separate project that you are working on, or was it just an example?
So you asked me, I'm going to try to repeat, you asked me if I mentioned the calendar Pandem and if I'm going to do anything else about it. I'm trying to, because it's called the calendar Pandem and it has these 12 months of the year as entrances, I was very interested in it, and I also I ended up kind of stretching my reflections on the building almost to a year now. And I do that because I think time is important in relation to that building, but also because it's nice to take your time to dive into squatting history. And yes, it's going to eventually be some sort of podcast and a visual archive of it made public. Because I find it very interesting. It started as a fascination for me because it's such a recent thing, but it's not really that obvious. Right now, the calendar Pandem is a series of lofts, so it's just really fancy apartments, and across the artists in Amsterdam. So you probably know it.
The calendar Pandem?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Redevelopment.
Yeah, it's
They also think that's probably one of the last big
yeah,
squats that were
yeah,
still active.
yeah. Yeah, we were walking around there. Me and my partner were walking around there at a certain point, and there was an older gentleman coming to us and saying, "Yeah, I remember it was like 10 years ago or something, but it was 20." And for him, it was still so like, it's like almost yesterday or something, because he went to parties there, and it was like a really like community. Yeah, a lot of concert, and it's really well documented because it happened when the internet was also kind of talking about social media. There was no social media. It was 96 to 2000. But it was like this birth of like blogs and everything else, and they also had a really well documented online archive of everything. I mean, a lot of videos, a lot of really basic HTML page. Yeah, it's nice. It's lovely. I'm really fascinated by it. Yeah.
Could you say a bit more, because you were talking about, I'm not sure if I will say it right, embodied protest and becoming multitude. Can you explain this idea? Can you say a bit more about this?
I think what I wanted to say, or at least what I'm trying to figure out for myself as well, is like you have this, well, you might make yourself, you might present yourself in a certain way, and that might itself be radical. Like the way you present yourself to the world might become radical, might become a protest. And I'm wondering if sometimes when you do that, you still feel the need to go to a protest. I mean, of course, the way we present ourselves is part of who we are and part of what we want to show to the world. And then, yeah, it's... The squatters also looked in a very particular way, I think, at the time.
How, considering you presented this really presentation, how do you feel going forward into the residency, working with your mother as well as being here quite temporarily, moving around? How can you kind of like, can you explain how this process of being in this exhibition maybe is going to influence or channel through into that time period? If you don't know, or just like kind of like tying up, maybe that's the whole process. Yeah.
So can I explain how this is going to tie into my residency with my mother?
Possibly.
It's a very good question. I was trying to, from the beginning of this residency, I kind of like tried to, so the residency is 1 month being in person in Hoorn, and then it's until the end of the year is being from a distance and reflecting and processing this experience. But I tried to kind of like guard this month so that it's my own time, and it's not something which is a production time, but it's more like, I still worked, by the way, but it's not production time for an exhibition coming out of this, or for anything coming out of this. And I think I've done a pretty good job in the sense of like fending off Tirza. No. They just, no. But what I realized I've been doing is I kept all of my previous engagements and I added even more to them. So I said yes to whatever came to me as a work assignment, because I wanted to show my mom a realistic account of my life as an artist, and my life as an artist doesn't usually involve living in Hoorn in residency and doing nothing. So that means that right now I'm overworked and underpaid, but happily producing everything else except for the residency, but I give an accurate account of who I am. And I cannot yet know what this will lead to, which, yeah, it's just, you're in it. And at a certain point it's going to be the 1st of August and I'm going to go like done, and from there I'll be able to let you know. Yeah. And you as well. It's going to be okay. I think. I hope.
And also, like on the back of that, does that kind of make you, because you also mentioned as well, kind of sort of briefly about the consideration of what it is to be in residence.
Yeah.
And like you sort of just talked about, you wanted to present the most realistic
Portrait.
position of yourself to
Yeah.
your mother, your family. And how does that tie in with the also the thoughts and the ideas around the idea of what it is to be an artist in residence as well? What, like this idea of even talking about shelter or it being a place to rest or produce as well, like these kind of, all these different ideas of what it could be. How do you, I suppose in a way you're always going to make it for yourself. But how do you, I don't know what I'm saying. How do you feel it's changing or thinking about what your ideas in residency is?
Well, I've never been on a longer residency before, but I think a residency should be directed by you rather than directed by production towards something. So I think, whatever it ends up being, I will hopefully hold on still the reins of it, because it isn't necessarily about it isn't about a particular outcome. It's about, your own experience through it. And it's been already quite emotionally intense, I would say. So that was part of it. I mean, I haven't been on a similar residency before, but I've also, in terms of time, I've been on shorter residencies and also alone, but I've also haven't spent that much time with my mom in the past 10 years. So, we were talking the other day that what happens, let's say if you spend 1 week together, you kind of you can keep up some sort of yourself and some sort of facade, but I think after a month you kind of everything falls apart a little bit, but in a good way. So you settle in and let's see what happens.